Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I'm not sure if we're being joined by more people, but thank you for being here. As I said, I have a cold, so apologies in advance because I don't sound great. Just as a brief introduction, I am Noelia. I am the associate producer of the Irish Society of Stage and Screen Designers, soon to be Irish Society of Performance Designers. Today we have here the one and only Peter Power. We are delighted to have you here. Thank you, Peter.
Hello.
And this is our second series of SKENOGRAPHIA masterclasses, and this is an initiative funded by the Arts Council Theatre Research and Development Scheme and presented in collaboration with Project Art Center. And please note that this session is being recorded for documentation purposes, and it will be published on our website's private area. And then we like to have this session as interactive as possible, so feel free to use the chat or to ask any questions you might have. And I'm sure Peter will be delighted to answer them. And I'm just going to be here in the background. If you need anything, just let me know. But I'm just going to pass it on to Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. So I have a kind of a mix of a slideshow, how innovative of me, and some sort of links to things. And it's, I'm not going to say it's messy. I don't think that's fair to myself, but it is certainly, it's winding. And because of the way Zoom doesn't like certain things, I'll have to like come out of screen share and go into another screen share and then come back. And there's going to be a bit of that. So forgive me if it gets a little like visually chaotic. I tried to make it very streamlined, but there are just limitations to all softwares. But I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'll do my best to explain what I'm at here with all of you. Hello, everyone, those of you that are here, and good morning. So, why did I call it a golden thread? I thought I would kind of, when Maria asked me to kind of do this, a part of the reason I gave it this name is because I was in a rush to because I was under pressure to make a decision on what I wanted to actually talk about. Was in a very busy period. I've been away, so and I've been kind of obsessed with this idea of a golden thread for a long time. I initially encountered the idea when I was a singer, when I am a singer still, but when I was being sort of training, there's this idea of a golden thread that kind of comes up to the top of your head that you're supposed to feel come up along your spine to help your posture and all that. But actually, in this particular discussion, the idea of the golden thread comes mainly for me about how music sound design, soundscape, all these terms that I'll try and unpack a little bit later, allow us to bring together experience design or world building, really, and how music particularly is so powerful at threading together multiple different forms of art. And I think there are very few art forms that do it as intrinsically as music. I think probably because music is a sort of a non-narrative, non-literal art form. So it's got this internalized abstraction that allows you to not use it, maybe, but yeah, use it. I suppose it's okay to say we use it, to bind together things that may feel disparate or in opposition to one another. And I think in many ways it's an incredibly useful, powerful tool in multidisciplinary art in particular. But I wanted to kind of discuss a little bit about, to say, the composition of time, and that to me is, I'll unpack a little bit later, but I actually think ultimately all experience is kind of the composition of time. And I think music, particularly as it's sort of built on that language, is a very, very useful skill to have to try and understand how experience unfolds emotionally. So, oh, by the way, all the images in this slideshow are all from various shows I have been involved in. If you'd like any credits for the images, do let me know. They're all fantastic photographers, but I won't have much time to get into all of that right now, because I'd spend the whole bloody talk. Crediting people. Yes, so if you're willing to follow me, we will continue this talk, and I'd like to welcome you to it. This is an image of Junk Ensemble's piece, Man at the Door, number 54. It was a really, really brilliant piece. It was a piece I wrote music for and sound designed in a bingo hall that ultimately got knocked down, I think, the week after we performed this. So it was very kind of like, it was like a requiem. Yeah, so let's go down the rabbit hole, folks. I put this up because I just wanted to make it clear that there's no sort of miracle to any of this. There's no magic in a way. It is a process. All of it's a process. You're trying to figure these things out. A lot of it's very scrappy, and you're kind of groping in the dark, trying to figure things out as you go. And that's totally normal to feel that way when you're doing this, particularly when you're constantly meeting new art forms, new artists even. It's all a sort of like learning curve, and collaboration is primarily your capacity to compromise authentically, I think. So I think that is just to say, I don't think I hope I had to offer, but I don't think there will be any miracles in this conversation. So a golden thread, what? Well, I'd like to start by discussing how I came to be in the arts. It's sort of an accident of my career. I was not a guy that expected to ever be wearing a paper stag head in a art project. I can really assure you of that. I was originally, I'm sort of classically trained in music. I played clarinet. I used to play clarinet very well, but I was my first instrument, I suppose, that I kind of mastered in a way. I play guitar much better when I was younger than I do now, but I still have it. It's in the background there. They sit with me in my life, guitars. They're a compositional tool. I play piano. There's a piano over to my left here and a piano underneath me here. But I am a crap piano player. I am a sort of what would be called a kind of compositional piano player, in that I can input all the information I need to put in to the computer. But I studied classically, and then I went to college, and I won't get into too much of my history as to why this happened. But instead of going to study in the UK, which was the plan, I sort of made balls of that. And because I was very stubborn, I quit music quite unceremoniously. And I went and I did biochemistry. And I have now a degree in biochem, which actually has turned out to be one of the most useful things I ever did. But at the time, it felt like I was just going to become a biochemist. I had no particular interest in the arts at all, actually. Unbeknownst to myself, it's like sort of emotionally though, I kept writing music all the way through biochemistry years, composing. I started learning how to use Fruity Loops, which is like an electronic kind of compositional DAW in a way, one of the earlier DAWs, or digital audio workstation. And then finished my degree, went on a sort of a 2 or 3 year, what do I want to do with my life, which sort of existed between Australia and America. And eventually my father sort of contacted me and said, you know, get your shit together. So I decided to go back and do music, which my parents laughed at and said, of course, we were waiting for this to happen. I had planned to go back and do the degree. And then a friend of mine suggested that I should take all the music I'd written and take my degree and take my grades, all my classical grades, and go in and argue for, I think it's like a professional exemption. I can't really remember what the term is. Instead of having to do the degree, I actually got to do my master's. So, and that began my time in composition directly, I think, kind of formally. Even though I'd been writing music, I think, since I was 14 or 13, I think, because my first instinct when I learned to chord was to write something with it. I don't remember really wanting to perfect. I was more like immediately wanted to create stuff. Did my master's. That was focused heavily on sort of like the interaction of electronics and stuff like that. And I passed that, you know, had a great time. It was difficult, it was great, all those things. And it brought me on to wanting to make my first show. And my first show was actually this brass piece I wrote called Brass, for four people, that was in the sort of fringe aspect of the Cork Midsummer Festival called Solstice. And that went well. And I started a company called Eat My Noise with another artist that I worked with up until about 6 or 7 years ago. And we made a show called Evolution. And that was the beginning of what I would term music theatre now. And then I hadn't really a clue what it was. I just knew I wanted to make more. I kept saying that, like, and it's very arrogant to say like music is enough. It is fundamentally enough in of itself. But I just wanted to have these more immersive experiences of music. I've just been to so many bad concerts and so many bad experiences sitting in front of these stuffy environments where music is sort of performed at you, not with you. And that was my classical heritage, I think, was that what I was kind of fighting with. I think it initially showed that I had a kind of disciplinary instinct very early. So now I would say my work sort of hangs on an architecture of research material with like a really strong central concept or politic. And then that's sort of, that's the project's compass. And then the rest of the experience is sort of composed of design experiences built on what a dramaturg from Australia once told me, and I wish I could remember her name because it's a phenomenal term we use a lot, but the adjacency of art forms. And that's where the golden thread comes in. I'll get into adjacency a bit later. But that adjacency is sort of achieved through transdisciplinary practices. Transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, they all have slightly different meanings. Personally, I just think we're trying to put really cool things in the same space. Cool, because cool is actually enough sometimes. I sort of borrow from traditional storytelling and use then more contemporary immersive experience design strategies to sort of lead a co-creation of opportunity for experience with the audience. In the making process, I try to avoid as much as I can what are kind of referred to as downward hierarchies. So like this idea of like top, you know, the sort of military structure of how we make. In the early days, I was very much into this lateral, everyone's the same thing. It can be extremely beneficial, but in the long run, it has its difficulties. So actually, I found what it is, like all things, it's sort of an amalgam of both. So for a lot of the collaborative process, it's a lateral process where everyone is welcomed in every part of the conversation. And then as we move towards an outcome, it starts to become hierarchical so that I can make decisions. Ultimately, someone has to make a decision. Someone has to say, okay, we've done enough creating, now we have to stop. That's the hard part of the job. And that's the director's job, that's the maker's job. And in my case, I've taken on that role. I normally use text to build things. I use poetry, I use prose. I sometimes invite writers into the process. I write myself. And then from that flowers sort of these big documents, right, that everybody kind of that contributed to. And there's sort of a process of contribution, distillation, as many times as I can afford, literally afford, or as much time as I have, until I feel like we're getting closer and closer and closer to a sort of a manifesto in a way. Music is central to everything that I make. That's why we're here to talk today. Music is the central practitioner, the thread through which all my ideas are started. And it allows me to have a sort of non-literal and abstracted connection with the audience while placing all these different art forms into a context. I think in my early days, I was a bit rigorous around the sort of intellectual side of my work. That's remained, but I've become much more convinced that work should be felt first and understood second. And I think I would encourage that experience of art as a general rule for myself and certainly for others. You may disagree as you please in the chat, but that's how I feel about it. I often collaborate with musicians, and that process of creating music highly rewarding rather than just composing, as in composing traditionally, just writing it down and giving it. There is a lot to be said for the back and forth, although truthfully all good composition has an element of back and forth in it. And then you'll see later, art forms I use, a lot of audiovisual technologies. Visual artists are now a huge focus of what I want to do in visual art. I've worked in dance and choreography. Photography is a large part of the sort of transmedial part of my work. Lighting design is a huge part. I have wonderful lighting design collaborators, literature, and sort of bespoke performance ensembles. I prefer to be in non-traditional spaces. It's more fun. That comes from my time working with Kirk Durka. Shout out to Kirk Durka, rest in peace. And so that's site specificity, which lends itself to immersion anyway. But I will be honest, lately I'm finding myself really attracted to black box theatre spaces again. And the idea of making work that can tour. I'm so tired of making these one-off projects that like I tear myself out and they don't go anywhere. That's just tiring and it is extractive. And I'm trying to avoid that extractive process later in my life. The ideal practice for me would be a sort of involving, evolving story, exhibition, sort of installation space, site-specific performances and traditional spaces combined into a curated experience for like a wide-reaching concept that allows in the audience to make decisions about themselves. The next slide is, I think one of our participants today is in this slide, who I've worked with before. Hi, Aisling. There she is with her harp. This is a very quick conversation. One of the things I said I wanted to talk about was the difference between the descriptions of sort of composition, sound design, soundscape. I'm going to give a few little thoughts on that, and then I'm going to move on from it because I think most of the terminology important, the differences of the terminology are really legal more than they are anything else. And the legality of them are very important. And I would say anyone in here that's a composer who is interested in moving on, you really need to get good. Trust me, I've been consulting recently with the theatre forum on their new contracts. You need to get good at knowing when something's composition and when it isn't, because it's very different for you, the consequences of that. Your rights are, what your tax situations are. But anyways, let's start with what composition might be. Composition has multiple meanings. By the way, interrupt if you want. This is feeling like a total seminar, but I'll keep going for now. Composition has multiple meanings. It's not just a word to be used within musical constructs. It literally means the sort of nature of something's makeup. So the composition of something, its ingredients, its structure, its form, or its being. What are we composed of, as you know, a phrase is used. In writing, composition is used as well. There's kind of traditionally 4 forms, sort of narrative, expositional, descriptive, argumentative. But I think those forms kind of don't really apply anymore. I think they were sort of all thrown out in the 80s, and it's all a bit of a wild show. But they are useful ways to sort of view structure, because ultimately removing structure is only beneficial when you've understood it, you know. Or maybe it's better to say, don't feel trapped by those things. Musically, I was thinking about this for a while. I think you could strip it all back to a couple of simple things. I think musically you could argue that composition is essentially the experience of a melody, which is the succession of a structured sound, like a sound happening one after the other, integrated with harmony, which is the sort of building of interactive layers of sound. And I think there's an ironic analog here between the traditional form of storytelling and the immersive form of storytelling, because in many ways, traditional storytelling is more melodic and immersive story design is more harmonic. But that could be argued. I just think it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. However, to get past the sort of like basics of composition, I'm more interested in this, which leads me to the composition of time term for this talk, is I actually think composition is about structuring time. And it's sort of the assembly, the distillation, and the deploying of duration, how duration works, how experience works. And it's the alteration of the tempo of our experience of linear time, or the linear experience of being. And that's why I think music, you'll so often, it will zoom in or zoom out. Like a piece of music that could be 20 minutes long can feel 2 minutes long. A piece of music that's 5 minutes long can feel 40 minutes long. Time changes, the experience of time changes. You'll forgive me, I'm messing with my nose because I have a bit of a cold. And I would say composition, although it has this endless quality to it, it feels like it could be forever, all that we write, the annals of compositional opportunity feel eternal. In many ways, it actually has a sort of a finite construct, even when you go into atonal and sort of sound, and it has a finite nature to it. I think in many ways, that's what makes it so beautiful. It's the limits that make it feel so beautiful. However, it is fundamentally limited by a sort of series of rules, if you want to call it that. To think about this versus sound design, I think sound design borrows from a sort of universe of sound experience. So the city, the forest, the industrial, the natural, the wild madness of life, the creation of, it's also the sort of creation of artificial sounds, the making of sound, the designing of sound, the designing of the experience of sound is a large part of it for me. And there's a sort of the discovery and creation of new universes of sonic experience. So that's kind of what you're designing. And but I would say sound design, rather than seeing it as sort of like, I think it's more of an action than it is an experience. So I think it's a good way to sort of frame it that way. It's a thing you're doing. And it has multiple methodologies and iterations, but it is fundamentally about structuring and creating in that way. And although that has analogs to composition, I do think they do kind of operate in 2 different very universes, because sound design ultimately can come from anything. You know, it is literally sonic events. And then soundscape, I don't like this word. I really don't. It gets used a lot. The Irish Times Theatre Awards use it. I just think it's really not a sufficient word for what's going on. I think it's a sort of a cop-out in a way. But you could argue soundscape is the ecology of sound, where the combination of elements of music, sound design, etc., 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 arises in an immersive experience, an ecological, environmental experience of sound. I will say, ultimately, the magic of this is not actually in their separate forms, but it's the blurring of them. and or I think it's what the composer Heimbach calls Unschärfe, which is like a German term for blur. I think it's about blurring. Blurring is actually where it comes in, and most of what we're going to talk about today is blurring, actually. So they're great things to know legally. Get on your shit and know the difference between composition and sound design, so that you know how you're going to get remunerated in your life and how you're going to pay your taxes. But I think as a maker, I would just throw that shit out and not worry too much about it. I think make things the way you want, use the structure of what you feel is comfortable and mess with it. Aisling, thank you for your image. You will appear again. Okay, let's start with some design principles around surround sound. I'm going to start with the physical surround sound. This is an image from a show that I made called Inquire with in Eat My Noise, the duo that I used to work in. We made this together. And I'm going to try and show a video, and you're going to hear me talking about the structure of the physical sound design. And I may have to change the share options to do this, but we'll see what happens. So let's just go for it. This is our first example. And of course, we're going to have to deal with really annoying ads before we get to see what it is I actually wanted to show us. So there we go. Skip ad. So if you guys could let me know if you can actually hear things when it comes in.
So what we did was the show that we designed.
We can.
So in each speaker is a track of symbol, and that allowed us to create a live electronic word. Because the sounds are pulled apart, and they're really strong in the room. When you stand back or stand beneath it, you actually experience the real person. So the idea of the word is you walk beneath what would essentially be human voices indirectly active. So wherever you stand, your own individual experience. So the speakers appear behind them, just above people's heads, so you can find a spot underneath. You can have your own experience behind them, and every other speaker that you stand in, you can have a different experience behind them directly, unlike the non-content shows where you were listening as a block from the reality. In this case, you have to choose what you want. And we were even surprised ourselves. So, in the dark there, you can see me soon. What we're going to experience now is a small example of the lights themselves being married to the audio. So we built a ceiling of lights, all of which are controlled by the music itself. So the whole experience above is in time with the music, run through Ableton. So the ceiling itself functions autonomously as a lighting source, but it also functions as an actual extra to the music, basically. And each one of them is individually programmable, and each one of them is individually playable, very much like a speaker. So the whole sound and light is spatialized, depending on where you are and what you're hearing. So every sound that you hear also comes from one place. in relation to where the lights are shining from. So we get a lot of that stuff. So yeah, that's the lighting. That's how that works. Okay.
So I might leave that for now and go back to our talk. So that was Inquire. That was just a good example of physical sound design. Why I say that is because it's about structuring objects in space. So and particularly in surround. One of the difficulties I found initially early on in designing in theatre was the sort of proscenium arch front end experience of sound, which felt very like sitting in front of a stereo system, which I think traditionally is what a lot of people are used to, you know, and they're fine. It's not that it's bad. It's the same experience of being at a gig, you know, but there's something else about, I had always wanted to make the sound more persuasive than that. And to me, it's positioning sound into human space that starts to create this difference between sort of composition, sound design, soundscape, where you start to generate an ecology in sort of an ecology of experience in a space. And that has been a hugely important part of my work, I think, as I've gone forward to try and understand a little bit. And so it began with like adding a few extra speakers, then it began with this thing of hanging loads and loads of speakers. That process has followed me through my career, a little bit of like, you know, creating individual speaker sources. There wasn't really anyone doing it at the time when originally doing it. It's become maybe a little more common practice now, but at the time it was really difficult actually. And not to say that it's that long ago, but particularly using Ableton as a platform for that. Ableton, if anyone here is familiar with, is a DAW. I'll kind of describe a few of those at the end. This picture is of Neon Western, a piece I did with Conflicted Theatre years ago as part of Eat My Noise as well. Although I was working this one alone. I thought I would just quickly show, I'm not sure how interesting this is to everyone, but I just wanted to show what it kind of looks like to design underneath the hood of a project, how you sort of build the world of speakers. So this piece, you can kind of see in there's like more of those speakers that I initially would have used. There's a system here. It's all very dark, but basically this is a massive warehouse space that had multiple points of reference. So there was no front to the experience. The experience was happening over you, under you, beside you, around you. So in order to make that work, the sound had to do the same thing. If the sound doesn't travel, then the experience doesn't. And also sound is incredibly persuasive. So you'll turn to meet a sound almost more than you would turn to meet a light. So I'll just give you a quick look at this. And again, I'll just have to quickly change the share settings because obviously this is annoying. So this is just I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but this is the warehouse space that was sketched up where we drew it up just in 3D. I think this is Google Sketch was used for this one at this. But this is the opposition. Opposition, for anyone that wants to know, is where you operate the show from. That's a huge decision you make as a team. It has a financial impact. It has a control impact, how long the cabling is. You know, it's a very big kind of decision that everyone has to make together. This is a side view of the space. Beside the space, there was a corridor running alongside the entire warehouse. In it, I had designed 3 speakers because there was a car that drove up here that had a soundtrack playing in the car. And over it interacted with the music above in the ceiling. So this was spatialized. This is 1 control point, 2 control points, 3 control points. And that allowed me to like create an opening gambit for the audience before they came around and in the front door. Once they got to here, this speaker was at the very end of the space, and it sort of like cleared out sonic palette, as it were, coming out here. You met the sort of beginnings of music. It actually had a reference to what was in the car, which was like, I found really interesting at the time. And then you would come into the main space. There were two major speakers here. I do this thing quite a lot in my work, where I like to take a sound that exists in the space and augment it. So this was a huge rolling steel door that came up. So what the idea was is I recorded that steel door, and then I played it back into the speaker system as the door was coming up. And so you would get what felt like a normal door opening, and then suddenly the door, when it stopped moving, it would still, the sound would keep going, and it has this effect on people. It's quite uncanny, and it is a thing I would recommend trying with and messing with in your work. But it really causes people to go into a sort of a dream state, because immediately you're shifting the kind of rules of reality. And so I remember getting great joy out of watching that happen, and people just like having this sort of brain fart, where they would be like, wait a minute, why is this, what's happening? Why is the door still, it's not moving and it sounds like it is. So overlaying realities like that is a real tool of immersion. Then this is an overview of the space. This is where the main performance space was. There was a massive PA in a quad set up around them. So this was like, and I could control each one of these individually. So I could change the angle of presentation. This up here could be a standard stage. This could be a stage. This could be a stage. This could be a stage, or all four were a stage. And that was done all the time in that show, left, right, back, front. That's how we used it. And then hanging over the audience was another series of speakers done in a lateral array, which meant that I could create, if you kind of imagine combining these ones with these ones, I could pull sound forwards and backwards from both of these planes. And so it meant that I could have it all on at once, and you get this really immersive quality, or you could like fiddle with the direction of things. And actually, when the music was written, I wrote it in layers such that the whole track was disassembled. So it wasn't presented like a standard stereo track. Actually, you know, the hi-hats were here. There was, you know, only voice here. It was split up so that the experience was very, very, very physical. And that was a large part of the kind of design. And then there was another kind of practical radio speaker here. And actually, this is only, it went on to become, there was a piano speaker as well. So there was a real piano in the space that was wired with speakers. And again, it was about that exact same thing, the performer playing the piano. It all feels like it's all, and then she would stop playing and the piano would keep playing. And it was that idea of like just constantly messing with reality to kind of get people to snap out of their too formal relationship with experience. So that was Neon Western. That was a Neon Western prologue, actually, an extremely successful project. Unfortunately, the follow-up wasn't, and it was because we ended up getting stuck for loads of reasons it didn't, but it's I'm very proud of this particular experience. Right, moving on. Anyone have any questions or anyone say anything before we move on? We doing okay? I'll move on. So this piece is called Afterlight. Afterlight, These Dark Citizens. It was and is a multi-immersive installation. It was across an entire city. It had 5 or 6 installation points. This is actually one of the end points of the show. We actually had a bus stop built inside a warehouse. The bus stop was made from mirrored glass. This portion of it here was turned into a screen. It was projected on. This here, this traffic light, or this street lamp, was actually constructed. It was made, and the inserts were changed from standard sodium into controllable RGB light. And this was just there was an apartment built up here. You'll see image of it later. And this was just one of the installations. There's one of 5 or 6 that were built, and you encountered the piece across the entire city. I wanted to show you this because this is sort of like digital surround sound, and that is another area that I think is really worth looking into if you're interested at all, because it actually is a form of composition, and I think that it's really worth learning it, because composition, in order to write for modern immersive experiences, which I'll describe a little bit later, you need to understand the gamification of audio and the sort of generative qualities of audio. It's not enough to write linearly. if you want an experience to have open-ended moments where everything is not fixed, which ultimately immersive work kind of has to have, you need to learn how to write in an upwards fashion as well as a cross fashion. And what I mean by that is the music has to be able to unfold. So instead of writing a fixed piece of audio that's 3 or 4 minutes long, that just starts, middles, and ends, you need to write it and understand the intersecting layers of what you've written, such that you structure it where it maybe the piece of music has 4 or 5 events, shall we call them, and those events are triggered by positional information from where the person is or what they're seeing or what they're experiencing, but that those things don't happen in a fixed time. They happen only when the audience member crosses a performative threshold, like a moment where you want that to occur. And that means you have to write a different way. You can't just write in the traditional sense. You have to write in a way that understands that time is not fixed, in fact. And this again comes back to this idea of the composition of time. It's about understanding time specifically and how it unfolds and how you want it to unfold. And that's the sort of art in what I think ultimately immersive work is about. And it is why I would argue again, music is one of the ultimate generators of that experience. I think the best immersive experiences I've ever had are generally because the sound and composition are so intrinsically built in and so well managed that the experience itself, it almost naturally understands its position in time and its control over time. And the bad ones are nearly always fall down sonically first. That's the thing that falls down, I think, a lot. And it's odd because a lot of the immersive projects can actually, they don't really respect music and composition enough sometimes. And you get this sort of, you'll see it in gaming a lot, they'll add it in very late, or film that's added in very late, or, you know, and I think it's, even in theater, it can be added in very late. And I think what it comes down to is a real misunderstanding of the craft and its position and its power, actually. And I think it's up to us as composers, designers, multimedia artists, multidisciplinary artists, whatever all of you believe yourselves to be advocates and experts and craftsmen about what we do and like push for that. So Afterlight is a good example of digital design. I'll show you how this was built if you want, for 5 minutes. This work was made for headphone and a GPS locational and a locational GPS app. And I'll show you that now. It's easier for me to show it than for me to even dare try and explain it. And I hope this jumping in and out thing is okay. There just really isn't another way to do it. I apologize. So here we are. This is Afterlight. This is under the hood of Afterlight. This is Cork City over here. As you can see, this is the entire experience of the work. I'm going to try and zoom in slowly. It's actually hard with this. Okay. This was how the work was sort of experienced. The audience met here at the Everyman Palace, and they would turn on their mobile phone. They would set the app going. They would put the phone in their pocket, put their headphones on, and then that was the last interaction that you had to have with the application. It kind of did everything automatically from that point on. So they would walk along here. They had a map. They walked along here and they could make decisions. They didn't have to go this way. You could go this way. You could go this way. You could go this way. You kind of could decide what you wanted. I did, however, and this is where later on I'll discuss the difference between traditional and immersive telling. I tried to combine both in this project. Because I actually think both are extremely valuable. I used to think immersive was much better than traditional, and I kind of have changed my mind. I think they're both valuable. And what I gave was suggested routes, and I suggested that if you wanted to do this one, so you know the way when you go on a trail walk up when you're going hiking, and it says, do you want to do the 50-minute one or the 2-hour one or the 25-minute one or the notional 5-minute one? There was kind of like that built into it. It was like, this is the one I would do. This is the one that gives you all the extras. This is the one that's the quickest one. This is the one that does this. I gave options, and people actually mostly did the full one, which was interesting. But yeah. And so in each one of these, you have to imagine this like a map, like an active map, okay? And each time the GPS tracker on a person's phone would fire. As soon as they crossed the threshold of this, whatever event that I had built into this would occur. And as they would walk out of it, it would start to not occur. And so someone's mic is on the way, just so they know. And so I think, yeah, thank you. And so you would walk through these things and you would kind of encounter these different experiences. And the point was that the project followed you almost, or occurred to you. Now, this is in a real city, so it was happening in real time. Real stuff was going on, like people were around. So it is really uncanny to have this personal experience of a city going on while all this other universe of experience is happening. And it feels very liminal, like someone has pulled back a veil in some way on the universe. And yeah, and in these then there were very different, there was different types of compositional structure. There were performance poems that were underscored. There were complete sound design works that were just sort of overlays of city sound in the wrong place. There was a kind of quality of just music at times, and it kept switching between these dialogues that were, or monologues that were like with this central character that was speaking in poetry, to these dialogues with where two people would speak together, to these sort of meta conversations about the city, to totally music immersive experiences. And they would keep swapping role, position, and power. And it was, I mean, I will honestly say this, the choreography of this is, maybe it doesn't look hard, maybe it does, I don't know. It was really hard to do this. But this is where I think all of my experience of working in traditional composition, traditional theater, front-end theater, site-specific theater, into game design, into film, into dance, where all of it sort of came to bear, actually, where I really felt that although it was hard to choreograph this, I knew precisely what I wanted to happen all the time. And I knew precisely how I wanted time to unfold. I knew how I wanted this experience to unlock itself. And that came from actually doing this walk. I think I did it like, I'm exaggerating to say like 70, 80 times, maybe more than that. And I would go along and I would feel the length of things. I would time what it was like to walk at a normal pace. I would, you know, and then I also went out with ambisonic head or binaural head recorders, and I recorded the entire soundscape of the city 5 or 6 times. And then when I made the sound design, I overlaid that recording back onto the recording. So what was really strange about it was, you would, like a car would pass you in the headphones and it would sound like a car passing, you would turn and there would be no car, because the car had passed me when I originally did the walk. So there was this sense of existing in and out of time in this project. And that is, I think, the strength of how it worked. And then there would be these fixed moments where things would occur and you would kind of stop and contemplate. And in those contemplations, along the way were some of the installations. So you would encounter a physical installation. There was one over here, there was one here, there was one there, there was one here, there was one, I think, down, yeah, one there, and there was one here. And there was 1 or 2 smaller ones around here. Yeah, so this is sort of digital surround sound. And then inside under the hood of all this, there are then other design practices. Some of the composition was binaural, some of it was traditional, some of it, and I hope those terms are familiar to people. If they're not, I can unpack them, but I'd like to do that more at the end. But some of them were actually about vector point sound design, so like really complex, kind of like swarming, the sense of swarming. There was some ambisonic design there as well. All terms, if you don't understand, don't worry, I'll do a little bit to unpack them later. Basically, what I'm getting at is, internally in the headphone experience, there was a lot going on in the design, the digital surround sound design. So that headphone experience didn't feel fixed. It felt spatialized. It felt generous and wide and sort of depthful. And that is necessary. You have to do that if you want the sound that you're building on top of an existing space to be pulled into that space, to make it feel real, to make it feel participant, to make it feel immersive. So many times I've done these things and they just sound like radio plays that are playing while you walk. And that's I'm not shitting on radio plays, but like, we know what it's like to listen to a podcast and walk through a city. It's about the podcast. It's not about the city. It's not about the space. In this case, it's a city. It's about just having a podcast on and walking. If that's what your goal is, my response is, well, then just do that, and don't waste your time trying to immerse people in a space, because you're not immersing them in anything. If you want them to be participant, and if you want the audio to participate in the experience of the immersive, say, construct, space, universe, then you have to work harder at that. You have to make it more permeable. You have to, in fact, unschärfe it, or blur it. It has to become blurry. And that blurriness is difficult, and there's techniques to it, and there's technologies to it, but that's how it's achieved. I won't bore you too much with the rest of this, but you can kind of see this is like a private viewing of the inside of my brain when I tried to build this. And each one of these events has a different, they have different functions. They do different things. Each one does a different thing. They activate a different way. They've got, some of them are cause another one to open, and cause another one to close. Some of them have fade entries and exits. Some of them are, you know, there's a lot here in what these mean. And it took, another thing I will say is it takes a long time to build this stuff, and it's iterative. So what that means is you got to get it up on its feet, try the fucking thing, see, does it work, go out for your walk, and if it doesn't work, come back and fix it. You do not make something like this and not try it a lot and like hope that like the week before you open that your concepts will work. It will be an absolute disaster. You really need to get it up on its feet as quickly as possible. Try the first idea, like write one piece in one way, put it in one place, get out there and hear it. And like, that is the way to do it. Trust me, I'm a night for waiting and waiting before I try these things. And this project really schooled me on how, if you want to do immersive work, you've got to get it up on its feet and feel it, because it is a complex thing you're trying to do. And because you're not in control in the traditional sense of the start, the middle, the end, you really need to go out and encounter it and become aware of the experience of the work in real time and real space. Right, I think I want to come out of that and go back to our TED talk. Great. So, sonic dramaturgy, what the fuck does that mean? I think the idea is that we need to consider, sorry, I'm just reading the chat there. Don't worry, sir, it's okay, your mics can be on, it's fine. Please turn them on and interrupt me, by the way. It's not it doesn't have to be one-to-one or one-for-one this way. Sonic dramaturgy is kind of everything I've just been discussing, except starting to really implement those things into a sort of practice. And I have a few examples of projects. This is another project I did. This is the project that I did with Aisling Ennis that's here, called The Boundaries Between Us Endure. It kind of drew inspiration from industrialization, the survival industrialization, the legacies of that, rites of passage, contemporary ceremony. We sort of collaborated in this sort of creative horizon, and it was a blend of music, performance, sculpture, light, sound, experience. It was multimodal, multi-directional, it was weird, and it was all performed to a sort of electronic score and live harp that was performed by Aisling Ennis, who is fantastic, and you should get her on all your projects. Those of you that are here, she's brilliant. And she was in it, I was in it, and the other artists, I made them be in it too. And it was a conversation about that. The sonic dramaturgical aspect of it is that the whole piece was led by sound, really and truly, when it comes down to it. And that object you're looking at there is actually a sculpture that was designed by Sophie Goff, and it came from a long conversations we were having about this idea of a carcass, this idea of, because this piece really was speaking a lot about industrial killing and abattoirs. But this object was turned into what she described as an object of poetic affection. And it became a performance object. It's an object as performer, as they call it. And it was a sonic object as well. It had a dramaturgy sonically. It existed not in one space. It led people. When it was being dragged along the floor, it was on a crane and it was dragged. It made these, not squealing sounds, it was a bit too literal, but this sort of music that was quite raw and difficult to listen to. And it was very, very alluring. And it led the audience into the kind of next space, which was this. And you can see them kind of coming down this sluice, and they're coming towards this structure here, these series of structures. That's actually the carcass up there in the corner. It had been dragged along the floor, lifted up on this crane and pulled to the right. And so the sound made all that quality. So you followed this sound into the space, and as it lifted up, the space opened up into this, we were calling it the tree. It was kind of this representation of nature being commodified by technology, but and it felt sort of ceremonial, and it felt sort of like a grove almost, if it makes any sense. But what the reveal was actually far from the case. David Mahuna and myself designed this, and David Mahuna was responsible for the lighting in this. It's actually not technically a lighting design work, it's actually a video design object. The light is actually video, not light. So that, I know that sounds kind of strange, but imagine all these lines were lined up against each other, 60 of them in a row, like a TV screen. You could put video on it. We broke it up into an object and then put video in, and you get this really fractal thing, and it's fucking absolutely stunning. And this is all about the choreography of the herd and the erosion of the natural. Designing this space in terms of sonic dramaturgy, in this idea of like, how do you dramaturgically engage with the space to make it work? You have to be extremely dedicated to understanding where everything is, why everything is there, and when it is. When is the question I always ask. When are we in this? So this was more of a fixed installation space. I'd like to show you just a little bit of under the hood of how we design the areas. So again, we have to jump out and do this silly system, but we're used to it at this stage now, so we'll just go with it. So the first area we called Lost in Forest, object area 1. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And we had this idea, I say we, mostly me, but I don't mean to own it that way. The outcome was everyone's input. That is the way that these projects work. With this was my original suggestion of everything, and then it kind of gets messed up and made better, in fact, by all the artists that you work with. That's the whole point of collaborating. They make your work better than you can make it on your own. But I had this idea of paper, this hanging, this delicacy, this obfuscation, and this sort of like multiple modes of viewing. And it felt forest-like, it felt dappled, it felt natural, it felt also not. And that was the kind of impetus behind that. And it was designed this way. Aisling sat on this platform, and this object wrapped around in front of her. You'll see in a second when we go back to the picture that this is what's in front of Aisling's performance. And it was to make her feel like she was lost in a forest, lost in this semi-natural space. And that was called, as I said, the Lost in Forest part. The boundaries part, object area 2, this was far more about obfuscation, butcher's plastic, this idea of feeling like, so we hung all this butcher's plastic to make it feel like we were in an abattoir. The person behind it, this looming figure, that was me, who just dragged a body into the space and hung it squealing in the area, disappears behind this butcher's plastic and becomes a performer. And then in front of them, this is actually Sophie's work here. These sort of reclaimed styrofoam objects that were then made into these beautiful standalone things. Her practice is a lot about the materiality of discarding. Why is something beautiful? Why is it not? Why is something that's seen as rubbish not? And you'll see how beautiful a job she did in that. This was the design of that area where we had these objects that she designed, these little things kind of cascading on brass struts up into this butcher's plastic, and I was behind this, and then there were speakers and projectors set up behind here, and this was meant to almost emulate like the idea of sheep being sent in to be slaughtered, but also people, and also not that, also just objects of impermanence being made beautiful and sort of cascading into the abattoir. You can get the point here, it gets pretty abstract, you know. And then performance space 2 was the drift and dream space. And that was a kind of an apartment, not an apartment, but a fixed room that was hidden. And that was the picture you saw earlier of Aisling standing with the harp. She was inside that face that gradually filled with smoke, and she would disappear inside it. And it was this really beautiful moment in the work. And it was obfuscated using this sort of disposable plastic that actually really beautiful. It's like cloud almost. And so we designed it then. This is an overview of the office. This is the harp. This was the fog machine, you know, and this is filled. And then this is the overview of the whole space. So there's our area, lost in forests and a harp. Here's the area with the sort of, you know, the little animals, little discarded objects, and me. This is the crane operation dragging the object. These are all performance spaces that are set out. And then this is the office space of the second harp. And all of this was curated and choreographed in duration over time. So that's how this kind of works. You put this time in to make all that work. I hope that is clear. It's a lot of information to take in, I know, but you're kind of getting where I'm going with this, I think. Here is a beautiful example of what I was talking about. So here is the Lost in Forests object, behind which this is the harp behind here. These are the sort of like paper strutty bits. This is the abattoir bit that I was behind with all of the little sheep, if you want to call them that, this idea of industrial killing or the mechanical becoming sublime in a way. Yeah, I think it's very beautiful. It was really, really beautifully realized. Sophie is a phenomenal artist. Another visual artist you should try and work with. Try and work with visual artists. They are fantastic. And it's very difficult. The collaborations are very hard, but they are a phenomenal type of artist to intersect with. And I won't bother showing you the object areas again. And here's Sophie actually in the flesh with her objects. She performed in the piece. She kind of assembled these, and then at one moment I take one off and I destroy it in front of everyone. And it was pretty intense. And also kind of, I remember when I did it, I kind of wanted to laugh and I didn't. And I wish back, when I look back on it now, I wish I had laughed actually, because it was like good to be serious and good to be to take your work in that moment. But I think if I was a better performer, I would have allowed in the humor in those moments, because, you know, I was jumping up and down on a styrofoam box, you know, or on an art piece, I think is really important. But I think it scared the shit out of people a few times. I remember they really didn't expect me because we were being so delicate, and I put it on the ground and they just jumped on it. But that was about referencing the disposability of art and the sort of the ethical numbing that happens when you are presented with something of scale and the global, and how industrialization has made killing the planet, killing animals also normal to us and also far away. And lastly, there is Aisling again inside the office space. And I was particularly interested in the harp in this project. Not only was it live, it's a sculpture in of itself. It's an object of poetic affection, as I said earlier. It is also a national symbol, and it is a national symbol that has been politically engineered. And I found it interesting to put that in the work when you're talking about industrializing, because the harp in many ways has suffered from being industrialized culturally. It has been sort of forced into this role by our government. And I find that and escaping that has been a really interesting relationship. I have had a love affair with the harp, and thankfully through Aisling, I have had access to it. But that was the idea of that. And the dress is specifically about the uniform of performance, the putting on your bib to kill the animal, putting on your sparkly dress to perform for the corporate event. This is a uniform that we wear that articulates an idea of belonging and industrialization and globalism. And I thought that was really interesting to mess with that. And that leads us to sort of the multidisciplinary dramaturgy. So I think I'll just quickly show this slide. I won't spend too much time on it because it's quite long. But what I just wanted to do is kind of hint at the beginning of concept building. This document, just very quickly, this was the initial conceptual framework I sent and it's all imagery from other artists as well as my own. And it's really important to see these as references, you know, and so these were things I wanted to achieve. So the first category was object as performer. So sculptures as performers, people as objects, performers as objects, objects as performers. These are really important languages. Suspension was a big time. So we would suspend things. And so you see whole sections of suspension, the tension, the mechanical of this. And then tension release was a massive thing in both object and in experience. And then the abattoir, just for those of you that don't want to look for the next second, if you're not, if you are vegan, there's a pretty graphic image coming up in a second, but it was a really important image from the show. In fact, one of the most important images in the show for me, which is this the image of a man vomiting while he's just murdering has just murdered an animal. And the sort of like dead look in the eye of all this, the TV, the sort of normalization of killing. That was a huge reference point for me in the work. Then the sort of PVC butcher's plastic beauty. Again, you've seen these from earlier. Again, you've seen these from earlier. And then the sort of maze-like quality of the work, the herd. And then the colorization of it, the sort of like techno-phobic hyper realization of the space, so that it becomes unnatural, unreal, impossible almost. I don't want to say liminal because liminal is such a word, but like you get it. And then this idea of it being a triage, a space of triage, a space of war, a space of loss. So those green curtains, all of that. And then this drifting dream space, so drifting between things, the dreaming state, and duration being a huge one, the idea of time passing. And to be quite honest, all those things were achieved by the team in the end. I was very, very impressed, and kudos to all of them for helping me get all that out of my head. Right, I'm going to presume you're all still alive, and I'm going to move on to immersion, immersion as an idea. And this is something I said I wanted to cross. I want to immediately shout out to David Busick, who I'm borrowing heavily from in the discussion of these things. Some of these are my own ideas, certainly some of these are his, about the difference of how immersion is achieved and sort of the difference between traditional and immersive storytelling, design, experience, those three different modes. But I said I'd cover this because I think I've kind of been talking about it, but I want to give it some terminology just in case it's a little bit like, it just sounds like me talking about my own work. By the way, that's from one of my own shows called In Clouds. That's the phenomenally talented Stephanie Dufresne and Tanta the choir performing with her in a silent performance in the middle of one of the works. Immersion emanates narrative or performance or experience or world building or concept design. It comes from those things. And it just depends on which of these become the focus point for what you're doing, right? So if we start with, now I will say there is a difference between traditional and immersive. And I think immersion is used incorrectly a lot. And also just to be clear, these are just to help you understand these things. These are not rules. Like, it's not like one is only one and one is only the other. They're obviously, to go back to Heimbach, Unschärfe, they are blurred. They should be blurred. Good work is blurry. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. This is the extreme Ray Scannell, and in the work the Buffer's Guide to Suburbia. I picked this as a traditional storytelling piece, which is hilarious because it really is not a traditional storytelling piece at all. But I just thought it was a good example of maybe a more traditional storytelling that actually borrows from a lot of immersive qualities. This actually, underneath the hood, I could talk for a whole day about the sound design of this. It's one of the most complicated designs I've ever made. It looks like nothing, but actually really, there were 3 sound design structures going on in this work. There was the standard front end concert design. There was a immersive surround sound design around the space. And then every single amp on stage was actually controllable. It wasn't, they were objects of performance. And I was able to write all of the music and into all the amplifiers as sound sources so that we could achieve 3 states of telling. We could make a state that felt like a rehearsal room that could then zoom up into a kind of a concert venue, which was the front end one. And then that could zoom out into this total immersive, beautiful surround thing. And it would lift from the floor up. And it was, I mean, I think there was like 140 channels of audio. It was mad. I'm very proud of it. It was a cool thing to do. But most people didn't notice it. And sadly, when you do really good sound design, most people don't notice you've done anything, and then they don't really understand how to critique it. But like, or they think that it's overkill because this is the argument. I remember in this project, they were like, it's taking too long to do. And I was like, it really is worth it. And I know it was worth it, but you end up arguing with people about these things. Anyways, traditional storytelling. So story design, if you want to call it that, is designed to reach out and strike the audience directly. It's manifesting that experience in what David Busick calls time-based mediums. And actually, you can David Busick has a lot to do with what I'm saying, as I've said. I just want to make it very clear. I want to credit him. He's a phenomenal guy. I'm an amazing professor of immersive dramaturgy from working in New York. But the idea is essentially, it's a time-based medium. You light a fuse, it starts. You know, traditional storytelling starts. You take out your lighter, you light it, it's got a fixed length, it's going to blow up at some point. It works. And we know that. We go in and we know that the show has a start and a sort of an ending. It's generally it can be from an author's singular point of view, but it can also be a story that's structured to kind of unfold. Maybe Enda Walsh's work, for example, is a good example of that. The narrative moves forward generally, deliberately, and the audience, by and large, don't have any choice in how that operates, and most people don't want a choice, actually, you know. It has an intentional impact on the audience's emotions and thoughts, like it knows where those moments are, very much like a composed piece of music, a fixed composition. It knows its peaks, it knows its troughs, it knows its structures. The narrative often hinges on a central character who changes and alters, and you go with them on that journey and you learn about life, you know, different values and questions and debates. And it has a beginning and it has an outcome, maybe not an end, is not a great way to call it. And the audience is the witness. And the story is intended to change us in some way, although unfortunately I feel like a lot of the work that's being made these days really doesn't do that. It just kind of tells us what we already know, but that's because I think there's a real nervousness around making work these days. But it is a powerful tool. Traditional storytelling is extremely powerful. I'm very blessed to have worked in theatre to kind of come to know that it is extremely powerful and it really can affect change. Then I'd like to talk about immersive storytelling. In immersive storytelling, there's multiple points of view. They're often contradictory or they have friction between each other. They offer different pathways for you to go down, get lost in the forest of thought. There's contradictions, there's discovery and there's choice. It's kind of a story structure that's designed to be solved, maybe, you know, it's like a maze, or, you know, you find your own path. Then it also starts, but it resists ending, it resists completing. It sort of teases the guest into, or not the guest, the audience into a deeper involvement, so that and it kind of waits for you to make your choices so you can move on. This plunging into this has the effect of making us commit to the work in a way, so the audience become complicit, they become co-creators, as the term is, and you have to make choices in that in many ways, you know. This obscuring of the story structure allows us to sort of parachute in audience people in, and they can kind of find their way out. You know, gaming is a really good example of this. There's not really a deliberate end. There generally can be a deliberate beginning, but sometimes there isn't, and the audience is actively engaged all the time, and it's okay if you miss things. That's the nature. You don't get to see it all. You're not supposed to see it all. That's not how it works. And the story sort of lives without you. So you're not making the story happen. It's happening in a way, you know, so you have an empathetic relationship with it. So that's traditional and immersive storytelling. Let's look at traditional performance and immersive performance. So in traditional performance, the live performance is offered to an audience, sort of an anonymous audience, and we all share the space, but you're not really there with the performer. Although, again, obviously these rules are broken all the time. Like, but look, you know, bear with me. I know a lot of postmodernist theatre loves to just talk to the audience and is very aware that they're there to varying different levels of success. But there is a sort of connection between the performer and the audience, but it largely remains voyeuristic. It is a watching is occurring. The traditional performance offers spectacle for the audience, and the performer takes on a sort of aura of, I don't know, like, what did David Busick say, like a god-like aura, you know. or a character of deep sympathy or whatever. And the performer triggers emotions and blah, 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 blah. The audience projects its own view of themselves onto the performer. And, you know, the audience is moved, the performer moves, and everything is choreographed. It's all extremely skillful. You know, that's how it works. It's fixed, you know. Whereas with immersive performance, the beautiful photograph from the Enter Juliet, and the previous photograph was from Dramaturgy, the piece I did, one of Emma Walsh's pieces. In immersive performance, live performance is shared, and it's sort of the audience has an integral role. They are sort of activating the work in a way. The performers can share space or not, but they are living in the same world as the audience. The performer and the audience are sort of partners in it, maybe, and the work draws on its power from people being there, the space, everything. Everything is sort of it's sort of exciting in that way, and it's generally in a physical setting or location of a different type, and it's about world building, like a much different kind of experience, you know, like you're performing within this evolving thing. So you have to design your performance to be able to absorb that, much like the way you have to design music to be able to do that. We will move on to traditional experience design. So how do you design an experience traditionally, you know? And it's important to consider that these things are designed, and to really be okay with that term, and stop pretending that design is a dirty word in that regard. It is actually okay to design something, you know what I mean? And to be aware you're doing it. An experience design from a traditional perspective borrows from templates of desires, human interests, experiences, stories, worlds. But it's designed to be unfold in a limited time in a very particular place. Although that can be, again, altered by you know, site-specific work. But there is this quality that there's a sort of essential thread running through it. It's shaped by a set of values. The experience is offered in order to kind of generate emotions, transformation. And it plays with the emotion, the audience's emotions and thoughts, and they encounter the experience. And like often when you go to a traditionally designed experience, everyone has moments where they go, do you remember that bit? Oh, that bit was amazing. Like that bit there's this quality of fixed events that people kind of mutually share. And that's really good. I don't mean to be like, isn't that so boring? I really do think that can be beautiful. I think on its own, it's not, though. That's where I differ. I think I want both things in my life. I want to be traditionally designed and immersively designed. And yeah, so, but I'll come to that in a minute. And the traditional experience of design is generally got a beginning and generally has an end, like you know, and you're left out, and you're sent out into the universe. Oh, I need to go back a slide. How do I do that? Can I go back? Yes, there we go. This is immersive experience. This is a slide from the show Afterlife. This is an installation by Lorraine Neeson, which is beautiful. She made this text work here and this video work, and it was just, this is actually, this is the video work of Porrick Barrett inside as well. It's really gorgeous, like this. I love this image, this sort of exiting reality, you know. But an immersive experience also borrows from the same human interests and same desires, but it offers them in a sort of ecological sense, a sort of immersive environment, a game design space, a world that you go through, very much like the way you actually live your life. You know what I mean? It's you know, when people say it was like a movie, well, life is not like a movie most of the time. It's something much more complex than that. So you are experiencing things sort of without them being perfectly unfolding, you know. And it's designed to be enjoyed. Challenges that you've set up in multiple venues, multiple experiences, all unfolding in a non-defined time frame, or an undefined maybe. It's shaped by an undefined set of values. It's quite complex. There's more going on. There's more to be chosen from. But there has to be an internal logic and internal architecture. Obviously, it can't be just random. Otherwise, it just starts to feel it doesn't feel like art to me actually then. And the immersive experience generally has a beginning without a defined end, I think. The concept design of Neon Western, I was going to, I think I won't, because actually I think we did enough concept design from the previous project, The Boundaries Between Us endure, but that this is a really good example of, there's an image, this is an image from the actual show manifesting from we were just obsessed with the idea of an umbrella, and it just became so important. We eventually got the rain machine made, and it was just incredible. It was really, really one of those moments where the dream inside your brain came to life. And that to me was a really good example of concept design. But trust me, it's similar to what I've been saying earlier. It's just that it was a document that we worked from that ultimately ended up in this iteration of a beautiful dreamscape. And it's magic when you put the time and effort in to do that. I want to quickly show you part of this project that was called The City Is Never Finished. And this is just to show you a design tool that I use a lot, that I would suggest you would use for collaborating. I'll show it to you now. That design tool is called Miro. I pronounce it Miro, but it's spelled like Biro. So I think it's Miro. Yeah, so sorry. So let's just go. So this is Miro. It's like this interactive collaborative board that you can all put your ideas on, and you sort of can move around it. You can share things, you can put in links, research, blah, 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 blah. This project was quite a large one as part of the Kilkenny Arts Festival last year during the pandemic. It was a fucking nightmare. I love it. I love it. It was a beautiful thing that happened in the only way that it could. Everybody worked as hard as they could. They gave as much as they could for it. But the truth of the matter is that actually it didn't achieve what I had initially envisaged. And in fact, the next project I did after Light was more of what I had intended City to be like. But I'm still very proud of it. I'm still very, but just to give you an example of how all this was done, these were all the fixed areas. And then you would zoom in and you can look at what my suggestions of them were, the actual space of what they were, all my notes and what it would look like. Then I would go into like my table of outcomes. So like what was required, the zone, the description, the tech requirements, the cabling, the power, the channels, all this, the COVID health and safety. And then the actual sort of like spatial design of it in the space, where it would need to face. And like you can see that for every one of these, there was, there's my terrible drawing of the hanging object. Every one of these had contents, a map, a inspiration. Some of them, this is actually one that was cut. We were going to do a mosaic window happening. Traffic lights that ended up happening. Yeah, so you get it. And then out here was sort of all the research that I was doing. So these books that I was telling people to read, all connected. There was listening, there was watching, and I was like, this is where the research is. And then I was like working on poster ideas. I actually ended up using this image in of itself. It was made by someone online. I found them and asked them could I use it, and they were really generous and said I could. And yeah, this was for the OPW, which was actually, they needed to see where we were going to go and stand. So like we had to do this whole thing of like what it looks like, where we would walk, what the audience's zonal positions would be. I mean, this was extremely difficult, this project. I can't describe to you how much went on under the hood of this project to make it happen. Moving on quickly to the storyboard of the same project. Here it is, and it's sort of, the project was designed in hierarchies of experience. One was the citizen, and there were particular pieces of music that dealt with that. Hierarchy 2 was the city. Those were, these were like, so these were all duets or solos. And then it would go into these group pieces that would occur. The piece was an hour and 50 minutes long that ran in a loop, and the audience were allowed in for 45 minutes at a time. So the audience could never see the whole project. That was the whole point. And then there was this hierarchy 3. So solos and duets, citizen, the whole space, and then this one massive piece of the whole space came to life and all the musicians stopped performing. This is the table of contents for how we would like achieve everything, where it was, what was involved. This is a map of the whole space in its entirety and how it would be used, where we would be, where the audience could be legally. There was all sorts of crazy challenges with that. Obviously, here's our table of contents. And yeah, and then here was the sound design. This was for me. This kind of looks mad, but you basically have to imagine that these numbers are speakers or states. And I was connecting each piece to each one, so I knew which one was where in the space. And like you can see these numbers up here. This is one locational sound source, another. These were actually entire PAs. This was a huge sound design. It's definitely the hardest sound design I've ever done. It was ridiculous. It was essentially 5 different gig PAs all operating individually. So when the solos were playing, one performer would play here, here, here. So they would play their own concert. Then they would combine into duets where they would play one direction, another direction, and then they would combine into one whole system where we would play together. And it was, I mean, it was really ludicrous, actually. Kind of, I don't know, should I have done it, but I did. And then this was sort of like this, just this of how I wanted the hierarchies to unfold, the map of the work. And this is the composition of time. What you're looking at here is the composition of time, how I would experience it. Yeah, so we will go back now. Sorry. So on to Flux. Flux was an installation work, and that was done with Eat My Noise as well. The duet I was in, and this is Dave Mahuna's design. And you're up for it. I just said I'd show you a little bit of Flux, just to break up the.
Why should you use Miro? Well,
why should we use Miro? Well, there you go. They really are listening to us.
It's
a board. So there you go. That was a little bit of Flux, which was initially in Cork. I went on to Kilkenny. Sorry, now just get out of this again. The big model. Oh, there we go. That's just an image from Flux. And I wanted to just very quickly talk about how I structure things using graphs. And this is the thing I've done in my career about how I manage the intersection of different competing art forms, different competing experiences, different competing ideas. So I kind of have to, I kind of use my science background to manage all this stuff. So I started graphing things out. So I just want to quickly show you a structured document. So this is how we structured the initial experience of that show you just saw, Flux. So it was broken into these works, these ignore the status over here. This is just what this is in the middle of the process. But there was a piece called Variant, which is written on bells for a 9-piece bell performers. They're actually real people performing inside the St. Timbars. There was Self Simulacrum, which is an organ piece that John O'Brien was a performer there. Rest in Tate, Substratum, Snowflake, Invariant, Inflect, Modal, minimal, maximal, bells and beauty, waves, influx, breaks, and fixes. These were the pieces of music. It's about 51 minutes, 52 minutes long. It was a bit longer generally because it wasn't that fixed a piece, but it was pretty much that. We needed to get it under an hour. There's a lot going on here. Each one of these is a different type of work. They're performed differently. Some are visual, some don't. We were like, how the hell are we going to map out this experience? How do we know, how do we control the dramaturgy, the sonic dramaturgy of this? And it kind of got down to a really simple diagram of like, well, I was like, well, we need to map intensity. You know, we need to map the emotional arc. And in many ways, I ended up using traditional storytelling design in order to kind of help me deal with the immersive quality of this. And what it led to was creating these graph documents of experience unfolding over time versus intensity. And this is what it led to. So this actually ended up, there's the pieces all in a row, variants of substratum, resting state, substratum, snowflake, blah, 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 blah. And these were sort of maps of how these pieces of music unfolded, and not just music, but experience. This graph over here is an intensity graph. And this is like how this was how we mapped how the work would, how we knew where the best place to put things, the construction and the structure of things. It ended up being around 55 minutes to show. The 130 for those nerds here, it's to do specifically with MIDI input, but that's for another day. So this actually ended up becoming the score of the work, and we gave this to the audience in the end because it has its own beauty, right? But this was actually just a boiling down of a load of graphs that I had drawn about managing all the competing elements, all the multimedia, transmedia, well, not transmedia in this case, but multimedia elements of experience. And this was bringing composition to bear on experience. And that is what I mean by a golden thread, the composition of time. This is a primal example of what that was like and what I was doing. And if you remember the piece I showed you at the start, in choir, the one on the roof, this also had a graph and was done the exact same way and was really managed in the same way, that we really spent time making sure the peaks and troughs were sensible and felt and designed. And that piece was 38 minutes long, 40 minutes long. But this was really, really a complex kind of like, I mean, again, it looks simple here, but this was a reduction. And I do this with most of my sound design when I work with theater, when I work in dance, is that I sit down and I really structure what we're trying to do. And I try to build a world of intentional decisions that are like really represented and really structured and architectural. And then this boils away. In abstract work, it's nice to show this because it gives the audience a sense of being able to follow, but for most of the time in my work, I don't bother doing this. I just let the thing unfold. It's more for me and for the performers to understand what their narrative or non-narrative journey may be. Okay, and then lastly, I just wanted to share a few pieces of tech with you that you should look into just for your own sakes. QLab, it's a design platform for lining up cues in a controllable environment. Some of you might know it really well. It's generally used for audio, but it can be used for lighting and video. Super easy to use, loads of potential, particularly if you get into networks. And by the way, for all of you or anyone, you need to learn about networks, get on it. It's essential now. There's Ableton, which is a digital audio workstation, basically the same as GarageBand or Reaper or Logic or whatever. They're all of different skills. Personally, I think Ableton is the one for creation, but people disagree. I used to use Logic. I don't like it anymore. Pro Tools, I have no interest in. It also has this quality of it's called Ableton Live, actually, is its full name. And so it's got a live performance quality built into it. It can do way more than you think. It can control lighting, it can control video. We just sort of have to like hack it to do that. Most of my shows have ran on Ableton actually. But it's also got the benefits of being partnered with Max MSP, who allow it to do a lot of really unusual things like generative audio, generative music, etc., etc. There's Reaper, which is like another DAW, but it's much cheaper than all the rest of these. It's extremely functional. It's very ugly, so it's not easy to get to grips with, but it is worth doing. And sonic design or anything like that, it actually has a multi-channel capacity that the others don't. You have to learn it actually if you want to get into that. Fab Filter is a production suite that allows you to kind of mix audio and also add some tonal plugins. It's mostly characterless stuff, but you know, there's Sound Toys, which is an amazing effects bundle worth buying. Get it if you can afford it, particularly the decapitator and the crystallizer. Oh, thank you, Lily. That's great. It's good to know. I didn't know that. Reaper is brilliant. I don't mean to shit on it. There's Touch Designer, which is you know what, I'm trying to learn it at the moment. It is an astonishing program. It is basically, imagine a thing that allows you to control anything from anything. That's the best way I would describe it. It can kind of do anything really, but it's sort of like alchemy. You can kind of turn lead into gold. It's a really, really worth looking into. I don't have time to get into it now. Resolume is a video presentation software. It kind of allows you to, it's a VJ software essentially. It allows you to do projection mapping and put loads of slices of different video up. It was actually used, that Flux piece you saw with the organ, that was Resolume running the video on that. Outboarding and modular stuff, that's just having pedals, synths, modular gear. That's like, you know, in terms of how you're going to build sound, always try to get stuff out of the soft synth world. Make sure you're adding a flavor to your own sound. Don't use stuff that's stock, and don't let anyone tell you that you should. It's bullshit. I hear so many composers who are meant to be, you know, good at sound design, or, you know, who are electronic composers, and they're using stock sound. It's not good. Spitfire Labs is a free thing. It's a huge amount of violins, cellos, blah 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 blah. Get it? It is unbelievable that it's free, and it will really lift a lot of your composition and sound design work. Dear VR is a sort of virtual reality implication of sound design into a traditional space. It's really good at positioning sound around you, beside you, above you. And there's better plugins in the world in it, but they get crazy expensive. And then in terms of kind of sounds, the areas that you should be looking at if you're really into like what I was talking to you about, blurring the experience. You should look into ambisonics, vector point sound, binaural, traditional surround, which we talked about today, virtual game engine design, which is like working in Unreal. That will involve using middlewares like Fmod, Fwise. But yeah, that's it. We got there. So we have 20 minutes to talk. So
thank you so much, Peter. That was great.
It was a lot. So thanks for bearing with me, guys.
I will invite anyone who wants to ask a question to join us on camera, or at least if you have a comment, it would be lovely to see people.
And don't worry if you don't.
No pressure.
If you're all off getting tea and you're not really here, that's also fine.
I think it's a fascinating journey, particularly how you have developed your own concepts around, and I'm not going to even try to or attempt to understand all of them. But it's a fascinating journey. Ashley, you were there for a sec. I don't know if you wanted to say something.
I think she's managing about 9 different lives there at the moment. Thank you for coming, Ashley. I know you're a full-time mom and full-time artist. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's weird. Asking me to do this talk, I ended up, it was weird to encounter my own story, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I didn't really understand it. I still don't fully understand it, if I'm honest. I don't really know how I ended up where I am or what I'm doing. And I am very lucky. I have been very lucky that I've been surrounded by very talented mentors, very talented collaborators, and who have encouraged me to kind of try move through different spaces as much as I feel that I want to. And I think that I'm very lucky with that, you know, I really am. And I think trying to explain it all there, it does actually sound kind of mad, but actually underneath the hood, it's quite simple. I think really what I'm trying to do, and I think a lot of us are, is I'm trying to build these worlds where we get to dream in reality. And that the power of immersion, the power of storytelling is that you can do that. You can bring people into another universe. And I think we need to acknowledge the power of dreaming in an environment like the one we live in now, that is so destroyed by the rational. It's so destroyed by the algorithmic, the industrial, this idea of that actually dreaming is a weapon to fight back, to reach people on a deeper level than you have to reach people emotionally as well as intellectually. And I think without that being achieved, it's very difficult to move people. And I mean move in the true sense, not only emotionally, but actually to physically move them into another state, another way of thinking, another way of being. And so I think dreamcraft is kind of what it is, actually. What it comes down to is it's a bit like dreaming and trying to get good at bringing dreaming into the real world, if that makes sense. And I think when I look at it all, I think that's actually all I've been trying to do. I've just been trying to find different ways of doing it, you know, and music was where I started because music felt like a place I could dream in, but then it started to feel insufficient. And now I'm always trying to go to the next place where dreaming feels closer. And while the real world is at war with dreaming, which is what I think is going on a lot. So yeah, so I get why it seems a bit weird when you kind of list them out, you know, but it actually, the impetus behind it is pretty straightforward. I think if we want to change at all, we have to do more than just point our finger at people and tell stories. I don't think that's enough anymore. I think we have seen that that's not working. And it's kind of what the term they use is hectoring, you know, this idea of like telling people, you know, and I just think that people are they need to have that experience of almost being, when they're asleep, that feeling of like being profoundly shifted and it happening in the real world is what makes it so frightening and so effective, because you're not asleep. That's the thing. And I feel very strongly about trying to make experiences that do that, because I do think I've become obsessed with the design of experience, the composition of time. I really didn't use that lightly. I think that is how you reach people. And it's the amalgam of traditional and immersive. It's the amalgam of transmedia. It's not letting technology lead for technology's sake, but really finding the poetic language and why you should use these things and like pulling them into the experience of the world, because people live in a world that's multimedia, that's transmedia. This is a transmedial experience, you know, like we're doing this all the time, but it's not a poetic one. And so I think it's the poetry of it. It's the structure and the composition that it's why poetry is so powerful. It's composition. It is time unfolding in craft. And I think that's what I try to focus on all the time when I'm working, is how and when and why are we here, you know? And I'm getting better at it. You know, it's certainly not there yet, but I'm getting braver with it. And I think it's very hard in Ireland because there isn't really a lot of support for a lot of this stuff. It's just harder here. We like our little categories, you know, we like you're a visual artist and you're a theater maker and you're this and you're that. And we love that. Or maybe the government loves it. Maybe we don't love it at all. But I am becoming more and more, I think I'm getting better and better and better at it. I think that's the best compliment I can give myself, is I think I'm getting better at it. I don't know how good I am at it, but I'm getting better at it.
I think you're doing fantastic. It is it's very interesting, that intersection of different approaches. It reminds me a little bit of the Dadaist as well, that sense of oniric art. I've seen a few projects there, and I'm not going to talk about them because this is not the place, but and how technology can actually help to achieve those dreams to be very redundant. Lily and Ashley, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
I have I was just wondering, because a lot of the work that you kind of showed us throughout the talk was kind of more non-traditional. I was wondering, do you remember there being any like particular show or experience or something that initially kind of drew you in that direction?
In terms of non-traditional space?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Kirkadurka in Cork. It was absolutely them, you know. I owe them a lot, you know. I owe them that imagining initially, you know, and I'm not theater trained in a way, you know. I didn't do a theater degree, you know. I am a musician, like that's my training, you know, and everything else I've learned on the job, you know, all the design stuff, all the technology, all that's come through the work. So I kind of saw theater as a very fixed medium. I was like, oh, it's just in there and they do the thing on stage and it's terrible costumes and I don't believe anything. And then, and that's terribly unfair. Some theater's incredible, you know, but it was Kirkadurka that like burst those doors down for me and brought theater into the universe of my world. And the sense of having to meet a story in a place where in an unboxed state felt wild. It felt fun, and the potential in it was exotic, if that makes sense. And I had already started working into, I mean, I have to give myself credit. I had begun working before I met Kirkadurka. So I was already kind of 2 or 3 projects in and I kind of knew what I wanted to do. But it did get to, what happened was I ended up collaborating with them on 2 traditional projects inside. And then I was asked to do this trilogy with them of Enda Walsh's works. And the first one was this massive installation in a metal factory, a literal factory that made metal, or perforated metal actually. And we built an entire sound system across a 2-acre site. It was like 40 speakers. It was ridiculous. I mean, my career is literally colored by me doing stupid things on scale and then trying to make them work. But I will never forget the sensation of wildness that it brought. And I really owe that to Pat Kiernan, and I really owe that to Enda Walsh, and I really owe that. So it was there that I think it began. And I don't know, it just felt so, it just felt like a dream. I remember thinking, this is what I want, you know, this is what I want. And, but that was the first instance of it, for sure. And they're gone now. Oh, God damn the earth.
I just wanted to say that for me, you know, working with Peter and then sort of receiving the information this morning, it's mad just to see the amount that you're containing over the course of a project. And as someone who has collaborated on the musical end of things, perhaps that there's just it's just remarkable to see now, you know, on the flip side, the extent of the detail, because I think you know, as you said yourself, Peter, collaboration, it's challenging, and you're holding a lot of different, you know, abstracts and logistics and practical and all sorts of stuff, everything from, you know, health and safety right through. But it's just incredible to see what you're having to contain and decide to share as you go through a process, which is, you know, a bit like surfing a wave, because everything is variable and everything is unfixed and everything is evolving. So that, just as somebody who has collaborated with you, that was remarkable to see. I was erect just looking at some of the graphics there, and I'm delighted for you that you have the biochemistry degree under your belt, that you're able to use that because it's phenomenal. Another thing I would say is when we were doing the boundaries between us in Jura, that I was just reflecting there as you were describing Kirkadurka. I think that was my Kirkadurka moment as a classically trained musician, who at that point I think had a very limited and performative view of how I could engage in my own artistic practice. And as I look back, say, over the arc of, again, just my own kind of personal little journey as a harpist, certainly that was a jumping off point for me, and that you really both encouraged and challenged me to kind of assess my own way of going about these things and what it is that I was giving myself permission to do or not to do. And that in itself, I think, has been massive for me on a personal level. So just wanted to say those two things, and I'm going to mute myself now, or we'll be stuck here for another 2 hours.
You're more than welcome, and I mean, I think the thing we're supposed to do for one another is pass on permission. I think, like, all of us have been given permission by someone else, and I think that's your responsibility when you make something, is that you're meant to pass on permission. That's the point. And I think I am an accumulation of other let's be fair, 50% getting permission and 50% refusing to be told no, which is like another part of it as well. And that you also have to demand permission as well, you know. But I certainly that idea of being given opportunity, a large of that part of that was actually creating an environment where we were taking a risk together. Actually, it was like, look, you know, a lot of the time I remember saying to you, I wasn't 100% sure, but that doesn't matter. Like, ultimately, if we make this call together, then we can stand over it. And like, that is how I've learned to collaborate. I think when I was trying it in the earlier days, it was much more this auteur approach. I thought that I had to like enforce a structure on a thing and make it like and kind of rend it out of it, you know, like, you know, it's sort of like almost like a blacksmith in a way. And I think even though I think probably good blacksmiths would tell you it's actually a collaborative relationship with the material, but like I thought that's how you were supposed to do it, because there's all that fetishizing of the auteur that goes on in the media, you know, like the Kubrick and all this crap. And I think actually the truth is it's a relationship. You're all risking something together. And so I think that Project Boundaries is a good example of where I was moving into the second phase of my practice, and I was trying something that I knew was very risky, and I had people who were willing to risk with me. And so as much as you may feel I gave you permission, you also gave me permission. So I think it works both ways, you know. In terms of the the amount of stuff I have to carry in my head, if I was to have actually showed you the amount of stuff that is there, I think it would have been a little bit we would have been uncomfortable. I think actually it is actually quite frightening, even myself looking back, what I'm carrying when I make these projects. I think there is an element of really being quite shocked at the depth, the depth of what's there, and that's I don't mean that in a boastful way. I mean that genuinely is just the actual intellectual and emotional cost of making things that are multidisciplinary. It's actually quite frightening, and particularly when I think you're inventing the systems to make these things work, because there's not really a way of doing it. You know, there are established ways that might work, but fundamentally, when you're on the edge of something like that, you're kind of making it up as you go along, you know, and you're just kind of relying on your capacity to endure, actually, more than anything else. So, yeah, so you're welcome, Sarah, and thank you for coming, even when you're in bed. Fair play. Sarah has a cold, and Dreamcraft forever. Yeah, so there is a lot that goes on under the hood, and you know what? The only way to achieve a dream state of any value is by doing that work, because actually there has to be an architecture under the idea. Like, that's the truth. And I think a lot of people misinterpret. I think I did. Misinterpret abstraction, non-linear stuff as being sort of random, and you do it, and then human beings are very good at spotting bullshit. You know, they really are. Like, that's a huge skill of ours. And I think and the worst mistake anyone can make is presuming you're smarter than your audience. Like, I think that is like fundamentally, you should never, ever think you're smarter. In fact, you should presume you're stupider. And I think that's, and I think you should work from that position. And that makes you labor towards architectures that are logical and firm and structured, or robust enough to take bending and malleable, but that you've put that time in. And if you haven't, you're just throwing things at walls. And you might get lucky. You might make a project where you do that and it works, but you won't be able to form a practice out of it. And I think everyone should just get good. This is the cost of multidisciplinary work, is what you're seeing in a way. And I don't think I overwork. Well, maybe my therapist probably thinks I overwork, but like I think there are people who put this much effort in and never, ever, ever, like, the most beautiful gift you can get from a project, I think the most generous thing a maker can ever do, is to not burden you with the weight of how difficult and how much work it took to make it. I think that's actually the point. That is where the sublime happens. That's where the exquisite happens. That when you don't carry the weight of the cost of the making. And it's the hardest part, because you want to scream at them and go, do you know how many hours I put into this? But actually the generosity is to avoid that. And I think some work really suffers from its insecurity around trying to over-explain how difficult it is. And I think actually what you really have to become good at is resisting that, like genuinely resisting it, and trusting that if you've put the work in, it will shine. If not intellectually, it will shine emotionally. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think it's a great sentence to finish off today. Thank you so much, Peter. That was great. I think it's going to be of great value as well to have it as a resource for many, many, many people that couldn't join today because of time. So we really appreciate Aisling, Sarah, and Lily that you made the time to be here. And I don't have much to say.
Well, just to say thanks for coming, and I hope, I'm sure it was long, but I think there's a lot in there, and it's been really good for me to go back and look. Actually, it's kind of like my own retrospective, so I think I've actually learned a lot about myself, and it's been really fascinating watching myself improve, actually. So it's so beautiful to have just to see all of the generosity of all of the collaborators I've worked with, and how much I owe them, actually. So yeah, so I hope you have a lovely day, guys, and I'll see you all in the real world at some point.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Bye, everyone. Ciao.